I am Joshua, 36 years old, and my own brother introduced me as a failure to the one man I admired most in the world. Before I tell you how I ended up owning the building we were standing in, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The night air in downtown Chicago was biting, the kind of cold that finds its way right through the seams of a cheap wool coat. I pulled my collar up and checked my reflection in the darkened window of a parked catering van before I crossed the street. I looked tired. I looked exactly like what I was. A high school art teacher who had spent the entire day grading mediocre watercolor projects and breaking up arguments in the cafeteria for a meager salary. Across the street, the entrance to the Zenith Gala was an entirely different universe. It was a chaotic riot of flashing cameras, velvet ropes, and people who wore outfits that cost more than my rent for the year. The valet stand was a parade of expensive European engineering. I stood there and watched as a sleek silver Porsche 911 tore around the corner. The engine growled, low and aggressive, pulling up to the curb with the kind of absolute entitlement that only money buys. The driver's door popped open, and out stepped Caleb, my younger brother, 5 years younger, 3 inches taller, and wearing a custom tuxedo. He did not just step out of the car. He launched himself into the waiting cameras. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, flashed a smile that had been whitened to an unnatural brightness, and tossed his keys to the valet without even bothering to look at the man. He told the valet to keep it close because he might need to make a quick exit. He made sure he said it loud enough for the onlookers to hear. My parents, Thomas and Martha, climbed out of the back seat of a hired town car just behind him. My mother was nervously adjusting her pearls. My father was already scanning the crowd, looking for someone important to shake hands with. They flanked Caleb like bodyguards, or maybe more like worshippers standing at the altar of their golden child. I took a deep breath, letting the freezing air fill my lungs, and crossed the street. I was not on the guest list. Not really. I was the +1, the afterthought. My mother spotted me first. Her bright, practiced smile faltered for just a fraction of a second before she plastered it firmly back onto her face. She scanned my outfit. It was a dark gray suit I bought off the rack 5 years ago. It fit okay, but standing next to Caleb's bespoke Italian wool, I looked like I was wearing a canvas sack. "You made it," she said, her tone dripping with passive aggression. "And you wore that." "It is a suit, Mom," I said. I leaned in to kiss her cheek. She smelled intensely of expensive perfume and stiff hairspray. "It is fine," my father grunted. He checked his heavy gold watch. "Just try to stay in the background tonight, Joshua. Tonight is Caleb's big night. We do not want any distractions." I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth. "Good to see you too, Dad." Caleb turned around. His eyes glossed right over me. "Hey, bro, glad you could make it. Try not to spill anything on the investors, all right? The cleaning bill here is murder." He laughed. My parents laughed with him. I forced a stiff smile. I told him congratulations on the nomination. Caleb scoffed and adjusted his silk bow tie. He told me it was not a nomination, it was practically a coronation. The Zenith project was the crown jewel of the city, and billionaire developer Lincoln Ramsey knew talent when he saw it. Lincoln Ramsey was a legend. He had reshaped the skyline of 3 continents. And tonight, he was supposedly going to announce Caleb's architectural firm as the lead on his new Skyline tower. We moved inside the venue. The ballroom was cavernous, lit by massive crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls. Waiters drifted silently through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. I took a glass just to have something to do with my hands. I drifted immediately to the edge of the room. I pulled a small, battered sketchbook from my inside pocket. It was a nervous habit. Whenever I felt completely out of place, which was always when I was around my family, I drew. I started sketching the structural details of the vaulted ceiling, noting the way the load-bearing columns were cleverly disguised by decorative molding. "Joshua, put that away," my mother hissed. She appeared out of nowhere at my elbow. "You look like a schoolboy doing homework. Mingle, but do not talk business. Leave that to your brother." I slid the book back into my pocket. I asked her where Caleb was. She pointed toward the center of the room. A tight circle had formed. At the heart of it stood Lincoln. He was in his early 60s, with silver hair and eyes that looked like they could cut glass. He was not loud. He did not need to be. The sheer gravity of his wealth and power pulled everyone in the room toward him. Caleb was standing right next to him, laughing entirely too loudly at something Lincoln had said. My father nudged me hard in the ribs. Come on. We have to go say hello. We need a family photo with Mr. Lincoln. It is good for Caleb's brand. I tried to resist, but my father gripped my elbow with surprising strength and marched me forward. We pushed through the crowd. Caleb saw us coming, and his smile tightened, but he quickly played the part. He threw a heavy arm around my shoulder, leaning his weight on me. Mr. Lincoln, Caleb said, his voice booming for the crowd. I would like you to meet the rest of the family. My parents, Thomas and Martha. And this. Caleb squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. This is my older brother, Joshua. Lincoln turned and stepped close. He was incredibly intimidating. He did not just look at you. He inspected you. He shook my parents' hands politely, then he locked his piercing eyes on me. Joshua, Lincoln said. His voice was smooth but commanding. Are you in the industry as well? The room went completely quiet. People were actively listening. This was Caleb's moment to shine, to be the gracious winner. Instead, Caleb smirked. It was that familiar, condescending twist of his lips that I had known since we were children. Oh no, sir, Caleb said. Joshua is not built for the high-pressure world of architecture. He is an art teacher for elementary kids. Finger painting and macaroni art. Right, Josh? A ripple of polite, cruel laughter went through the circle of wealthy elites. My face heated up instantly. High school, I corrected softly. I teach perspective and art history. Right. Caleb waved his hand dismissively. Point is, he is the creative spirit of the family, just on a much smaller scale. I build skyscrapers. He builds confidence in teenagers. We are very proud of him, in a way. He is sort of our family's cautionary tale about ambition. My mother sighed loudly. It was a sound of practiced martyrdom. He just lacks the drive, Mr. Lincoln. Always has. But he is happy, and that is what matters. Such a disappointment. My father muttered under his breath, but in the dead silence of the circle, it was perfectly audible. It was a masterclass in public humiliation. They had framed my entire existence as a failure in 3 short sentences. But Lincoln did not laugh. He did not even crack a smile. He just stood there, holding his champagne glass, staring directly at Caleb. The silence stretched until it became suffocatingly uncomfortable. The smirk on Caleb's face slowly faltered. Interesting, Lincoln said. His voice was soft, barely a whisper, but it carried across the quiet space. He took a deliberate step closer to me. He was no longer looking at my cheap suit. He was looking at my hand. In my nervousness during Caleb's arrogant speech, I had pulled a pen from my pocket and quickly sketched the marble column next to us on a cocktail napkin. I had not even realized I was doing it. May I? Lincoln asked. I froze. It is nothing. Just a doodle. Lincoln gently took the napkin from my fingers. He held it up to the chandelier light. On the flimsy paper, I had drawn a flawless cross-section of the ballroom's cantilever system, but I had added a detailed correction note in the margin about the stress load distribution. Lincoln studied it for a long, agonizing time. Then he looked at Caleb and back at me. You have a very distinct line weight, Lincoln said. The way you render shadow. It is not academic. It is structural. I dabble, I said. My throat was bone dry. Lincoln smiled. It was not a polite social smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just found exactly what he was hunting for. Tell me, Joshua, this drawing style, it looks remarkably similar to the preliminary sketches for the Zenith Atrium. The ones Caleb submitted for the competition. Caleb actually choked on his drink. He coughed wildly. Well, sir, we share genes. Similar handwriting, similar drawing style. It is a genetic thing. Lincoln completely ignored him. He kept his sharp eyes locked on mine. Interesting, Lincoln repeated. Because Caleb told me he drew those sketches in a fever dream of inspiration while vacationing in Cabo. Were you in Cabo, Joshua? No, I said, my voice steadying. I was in Chicago, grading papers. I see. Lincoln neatly folded the napkin and tucked it into his breast pocket, right next to his expensive silk handkerchief. Caleb, I would like to see you in my office tomorrow morning at 9 sharp. We need to discuss the final phase of the contract. Caleb beamed, the color rushing back to his panicked face. Absolutely, sir. I will be there, ready to sign. And, Lincoln added, turning his back on Caleb to look at me, bring your brother. Caleb laughed nervously. Why? Joshua would be bored to tears. Bring him, Lincoln commanded. All the softness was gone from his voice. Or do not bother coming at all. He nodded sharply to my parents, turned on his heel and walked away. The wealthy crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. My mother looked utterly confused. Why does he want Joshua there? Caleb turned on me. His eyes were venomous. What did you do? What was on that napkin? Nothing, I said, though my heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Just a sketch. You better not embarrass me tomorrow, Caleb hissed. He stepped uncomfortably close, invading my personal space. You sit there, you keep your mouth shut, and you nod. If you ruin this deal, Joshua, I swear to God I will make sure you lose that pathetic teaching job. Do you understand me? I understand, I said quietly. Good. Caleb adjusted his jacket. Go home, get some sleep, and wear a better suit tomorrow. You look like a funeral director. I watched them walk away to mingle with the other investors. They looked picture perfect. The successful son, the proud parents, and me, the quiet failure lingering in the shadows. But as I walked out of the gala and into the freezing night, standing at the bus stop while Caleb's Porsche gleamed under the streetlights, I could not shake the feeling that the ground had just shifted violently beneath our feet. Lincoln knew. He had seen the line wait. He had seen the soul buried in that sketch. And for the first time in over a decade, I was not just afraid. I was ready. I did not know it at that exact moment. But that small sketch on a cocktail napkin was about to trigger an avalanche that would destroy my family's lives forever. The bus ride back to my apartment was a 40-minute, grueling crawl through the sprawling city. I pressed my forehead against the freezing glass of the window, watching the magnificent Chicago skyline drift by in the dark. Every few blocks, I saw a massive building that carried a piece of my soul. The curved glass facade on 4th Street. I solved the thermal bridging issue on that design while Caleb was too hungover to even open his laptop. The retrofitted loft conversion in the West Loop? That was my concept, scribbled frantically on the back of a greasy pizza box at 3 in the morning, while Caleb was out networking in Ibiza on my father's dime. I got off at my stop and walked 2 blocks through the bitter wind to my apartment building. It was a cramped studio on the 3rd floor. The hallway smelled faintly of stale cabbage and old carpet. My apartment itself smelled of turpentine, graphite, and cheap coffee. My parents called my living situation sad. I called it affordable on a teacher's salary. I tossed my keys onto the small kitchen table and collapsed onto the worn sofa. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from my mother. Do not be late tomorrow, and please shave. You looked terribly scruffy tonight. I stared at the glowing screen. I did not reply. Couldn't. I closed my eyes, and the exhaustion pulled me under, dragging me deep into memories I had spent years trying to bury. It had not always been this way. There was a brief, shining time when I was the one with the boundless potential. 12 years ago, I was 24 years old. I was fresh out of my master's program in architecture, graduating at the absolute top of my class. I had a portfolio that my professors were calling visionary. I was hungry, ambitious, and ready to leave my mark on the world. Caleb, on the other hand, was 19. He was actively flunking out of his first year of business school, partying his way through the massive college fund my parents had set up for him. I vividly remembered the emergency family meeting at the dining room table. The air in the house was thick with tension. My father, Thomas, sat at the head of the heavy mahogany table, his face grim and pale. My mother, Martha, was weeping softly into a linen tissue. "We have a massive problem," Dad had said, his voice grave. "Caleb is in serious trouble. He is on academic probation, and he has some debts." "Debts?" I asked, confused. "What kind of debts? Gambling?" Mom sobbed harder. "He is just a boy, Joshua. He made some foolish mistakes. But if this gets out, our reputation in the community, your grandfather's legacy, it will be ruined. We need a pivot," Dad said. He looked directly at me. His eyes were hard. "Caleb needs a win. He needs a career that looks highly impressive to the board. Architecture." I actually laughed. I thought it was a dark joke. "Dad, Caleb cannot draw a straight line with a ruler. And he has no degree." "We can buy the degree," Dad said dismissively, waving his hand as if ethics were merely a suggestion. "Or we get him into a private program that is highly flexible with attendance. But he needs the raw talent. He needs the portfolio work." Both of them stopped and looked at me. The silence in the dining room became incredibly heavy, pressed down on my chest. "You want me to tutor him?" I asked tentatively. "We want you to help him," Mom said. She reached across the polished wood table and squeezed my hand. Her grip was desperate. "Just for a little while, Joshua. Just until he gets on his feet. You are the big brother. You are the strong one. You can handle working in the background. Caleb needs the spotlight to survive. He is fragile." Fragile. That was the exact word they used to weaponize my love for my family. Because Caleb was charming, handsome, and charismatic, but completely hollow inside. And I was quiet, slightly awkward, but full of substance and vision. So my parents made a decision. They decided to take my substance and pour it directly into his empty shell. Started small. A few drafting assignments here and there to pass his classes. Then I practically wrote and designed his entire final thesis. When he miraculously graduated and launched his firm with a massive loan from Dad's business accounts, Caleb landed his first major commission. I drew every single line of it. Caleb simply signed his name at the bottom. The building won a regional design award. My parents threw a massive, catered party for him at the house. I sat quietly in the corner of the patio, drinking a cheap beer. Dad walked by, patted me hard on the shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you for saving the family, Josh." Saving the family. I opened my eyes in my dark apartment, staring up at the water stains on my cracked ceiling. That was the trap. That phrase was the cage they locked me in. Every single time I thought about stopping, every time I threatened to claim my own life and my own work, they pulled the ultimate family card. "We are a team, Joshua. Do not be selfish. Do you want to see your brother end up in jail for fraud? Do you want to kill your mother from the stress?" The next morning, the harsh reality of my current life hit me. I had to go to the high school before the meeting with Lincoln. I stood in my chaotic art classroom, wiping dried clay off a table. The door swung open, and Mr. Harrison, the school principal, walked in. He was a small, bitter man who viewed the arts as a colossal waste of the school district's budget. "Mr. Miles," Harrison barked, checking his clipboard, "the administration board needs your supply budget for next semester cut by 20%. We are reallocating funds to the football program." 20%? I argued, dropping the rag. "Mr. Harrison, my students are currently sharing tubes of acrylic paint. If you cut the budget anymore, we will be drawing with charcoal from the cafeteria grill." Harrison sneered. "Then get creative, Joshua. That is what you art people do, isn't it? It is not like you are teaching them structural engineering. It is just finger painting. Do not make a fuss, or I will find someone who can teach this elective cheaper." He turned and walked out. I stood there, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Everyone in my life viewed me as expendable. A background character, a ghost. I grabbed my worn leather satchel. My friend and fellow teacher, Elijah, popped his head into the room. Elijah was the history teacher, a sharp guy who saw right through my tired facade. "Rough morning?" Elijah asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Just the usual," I muttered. "You look exhausted, man," Elijah said, his tone turning serious. "You know, I saw that Architectural Digest magazine on your desk last week. The one featuring Caleb's new project. You had redlined the entire structural diagram in pen. Corrected his math." Elijah paused. "When are you going to stop letting them walk all over you, Josh? You are brilliant. You need to get out from under his shadow." "It is complicated, Elijah. It is family." "Family does not bleed you dry," Elijah said softly. He tapped the doorframe and left. I looked around the classroom. I loved teaching, but this was not my destiny. I was hiding here. I looked at the clock. It was time to go meet Lincoln. It was time to go hand over my soul once again. The storm actually started the night before, just hours after the gala. At exactly 1 a.m., my phone violently vibrated against the nightstand. I jerked awake. It was Caleb. "What?" I answered, my voice rough with sleep. "Are you awake?" Caleb sounded completely panicked. All the smooth arrogance from the gala was completely stripped away. He sounded like a terrified child. "I am now." "What is it, Caleb?" "I am looking at the contract draft Lincoln's lawyers just sent over. There is a specific clause in here about IP indemnity, intellectual property, and Lincoln's assistant just emailed. He explicitly asked for the original concept sketchbooks to be brought to the meeting tomorrow morning." I sat up in bed, the cold air hitting my bare chest. So I do not have them, Joshua," Caleb yelled into the phone. "You have them. You never gave me the physical sketchbooks, just the high-res digital scans." "I kept them," I said quietly. "They are mine, Caleb. They are the only physical proof of my work. Do not start this righteous garbage with me right now," Caleb snapped. "Bring them tomorrow. Lincoln wants to see the raw process. If I show up empty-handed after he specifically asked, he walks away from the deal. If he walks, my firm goes under immediately." "Then let it go under," I whispered. I shocked myself by saying it aloud. There was a dead silence on the line. Then, Caleb's voice dropped into a vicious, low register. "If the firm goes under, Joshua, the massive loan Dad took out against his own house to keep my payroll afloat gets called in by the bank. Do you want Mom and Dad out on the street? Is that what you want? Because that blood is on your hands." There it was, the ultimate leverage, the heavy, suffocating chain around my neck. I closed my eyes. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a tight knot of absolute defeat. "I will bring them," I said. My voice was hollow. "Good," Caleb sneered, instantly regaining his bravado. "And Joshua, do not say anything stupid tomorrow. Just hand over the books and let me do the talking. You are just the archivist, the assistant." "Got it. I got it." I hung up the phone. I did not go back to sleep. Couldn't. I walked over to the corner of my small apartment where my drafting table sat under a dusty tarp. It was the only genuinely expensive piece of furniture I owned. I pulled the tarp back. Underneath were the massive, detailed blueprints of the Zenith project. Not the glossy, sanitized 3D renderings Caleb showed clients. These were the real ones. The charcoal and graphite sketches where I had agonized for weeks over how the natural light would hit the central atrium. The complex structural calculations for the massive glass spire. I had spent 6 agonizing months on this design, working until my fingers bled and my vision blurred. Caleb had spent those exact same 6 months vacationing in the Maldives and buying luxury watches on credit. I ran my calloused hand over the rough paper. This was my soul. And in a few hours, Lincoln Ramsey was going to sign a legal contract that would bind my soul to my brother's fraudulent name forever. I thought about Elijah's words. I thought about the smirk on Caleb's face at the gala. I thought about Lincoln's piercing eyes looking at that napkin. He had not looked at me with pity. He had looked at me with intense curiosity. I sat down at the drafting table. I grabbed a fresh, blank sheet of A3 paper. I picked up my favorite Staedtler Mars Lumograph pencil. I did not draw for Caleb. I did not draw the zenith. I started drawing something entirely new. A complex, almost impossible cantilevered structure that seemed to defy gravity itself. I poured 10 years of pent-up rage, frustration, and silenced brilliance into the graphite. My jaw was locked. The muscles in my arm burned. I drew until the sun began to aggressively bleed through the cheap plastic blinds of my window. If I was destined to be the family failure, I was going to be the most wildly talented failure to ever walk into Lincoln Ramsey's boardroom. Later that morning, after surviving Principal Harrison's insults, I took a cab to the Ramsey Tower. It was a terrifying monolith of black glass and steel piercing the gray Chicago sky. I walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that was larger than an airplane hangar. Caleb was aggressively pacing near the elevators. He looked wired. His eyes were bloodshot, and he was sweating through his expensive cologne. He was checking his reflection in the polished marble walls every 5 seconds. "You are 5 minutes late," Caleb hissed the moment he saw me. He grabbed my arm, his fingernails digging into my jacket. "Do you have the books?" I patted the heavy leather satchel slung across my chest. "Right here. Let me see them. Hand them over right now." "Not here," I said, yanking my arm out of his grip. "There are security cameras everywhere. Do you want Lincoln's security team to review footage of you panicking over your assistant's bag?" Caleb stopped dead. He quickly straightened his silk tie, his chest heaving. "Right. Good point. Keep it together. We go up, we smile, we show him the process sketches, we sign the papers, and then you can go back to whatever pathetic thing it is you do." "Teaching," I said flatly. The elevator ride to the penthouse floor was a silent, stomach-churning ascent to judgment. My ears popped as we passed the 50th floor. Caleb was literally vibrating with nervous, chaotic energy. He kept reciting a mantra under his breath. "He likes me. Lincoln likes bold visionaries. I am the face. You are just the hands. I am the face." The stainless steel doors slid open. The penthouse reception area was aggressively minimalist. Cold, expensive, and intimidating. A receptionist wearing a sleek headset looked up. "Mr. Miles," she said, nodding to Caleb. Then she paused, her eyes shifting to me. "My associate," Caleb said quickly, his voice cracking slightly. "Mr. Lincoln is waiting for you both in the main boardroom." We walked down a long, echoing corridor lined with breathtaking architectural models of famous buildings. I saw the Empire State Building, the Burj Khalifa, and at the very end of the hallway, there was a single empty marble pedestal. It was waiting for the next icon. It was waiting for the zenith. Caleb pushed open the heavy oak double doors. The boardroom was entirely made of glass, offering a dizzying, terrifying view of the city and the dark lake beyond. Lincoln Ramsey stood by the massive window, his back to us. He was silhouetted against the sky, looking out at the empire he ruled. "Mr. Lincoln," Caleb boomed, instantly plastering on his fake salesman smile. "Good morning. What a magnificent view." Lincoln turned slowly. He did not smile. His face was carved from granite. "Sit down," Lincoln said. We sat. The conference table was a single, massive slab of black marble. There were no contracts on the table. No coffee. No water. There was only a single, perfectly sharpened pencil resting exactly in the center. The storm had arrived. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. The hum of the advanced climate control system sounded like a jet engine roaring in my ears. I placed my leather satchel on the floor next to my chair. Caleb sat up incredibly straight, trying to project an aura of confidence that was rapidly crumbling. Lincoln slowly walked from the window to the head of the black marble table. He did not sit. He stood over us, casting a long, intimidating shadow. "I have spent the entire night personally reviewing the complete Zenith proposal," Lincoln said. His voice was smooth, but dangerously flat. "It is brilliant. The way the central atrium handles natural light load is revolutionary. It is almost spiritual." Caleb visibly relaxed. He puffed out his chest, completely misreading the tone. Thank you so much, sir. Inspiration struck me one morning while I was watching the sunrise over the Pacific Ocean. I just grabbed a napkin and... Stop, Lincoln commanded. It was not a shout, but it cracked through the room like a bullwhip. Caleb froze, his mouth hanging half open. I had my security team check the flight logs, Caleb, Lincoln said. His eyes were devoid of any human emotion. You were not in Cabo San Lucas when these preliminary digital drawings were dated. You were in Las Vegas. Furthermore, the digital timestamps on the CAD files, they were not uploaded from a secure firm server. They were uploaded from a residential IP address in the suburbs. A small, low-rent apartment complex. All the blood instantly drained from Caleb's face. He looked like a corpse. His mouth opened and closed silently like a fish suffocating on a dock. Sir, I have a remote server backup system. My workflow is highly complex and decentralized. Is it? Lincoln slowly turned his gaze to me. His eyes were burning. Joshua, open your bag. Caleb shot me a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Do not do it, his wide eyes screamed. You will destroy the family. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the brass buckle of the satchel. This was the edge of the cliff. If I opened this bag, there was no going back. The 10 years of lies would explode. Open it, Lincoln repeated, softer this time, but with immense weight. I unbuckled the leather straps. I reached in and pulled out 3 thick, black moleskine sketchbooks. They were worn, dog-eared, and bound with rubber bands. They smelled heavily of graphite and thousands of hours of desperate effort. I placed them on the black marble. I slid them slowly across the table toward Lincoln. Lincoln placed his large hand flat on top of the books. He did not open them. Not yet. Caleb, Lincoln said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. I have a very simple test for you. A design charrette. Right here. Right now. A what? Caleb stammered. He was sweating profusely now. A drop of sweat rolled down his temple, ruining his expensive foundation makeup. A test, Lincoln said. The room went dead silent again. I watched my brother. Caleb stared at the blank white paper as if it were a loaded gun pointed at his head. His breathing became shallow and ragged. He slowly reached out and picked up the pencil. His hand was shaking so violently that when he brought the tip down, it tapped loudly against the marble table. Tap, tap, tap. Caleb looked at me. His eyes were begging. It was pure, pathetic desperation. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to interject, to make up an excuse. I sat perfectly still. I did not blink. I am more of a concept guy, sir. Caleb laughed, a high, hysterical sound. I have technical people for the mundane structural details. My vision is strictly big picture. The visionary knows the bones of his creation, Lincoln said coldly, stepping closer to Caleb. Draw. Caleb swallowed hard. He put the pencil to the paper. His hand jerked. He drew a jagged line. Then he drew a shaky, uneven circle on top of it. It looked exactly like a child's drawing of a lollipop. It was utterly pathetic. It was the physical evidence of a fraud who had not actually touched a drafting table in a decade. Lincoln stood there and watched Caleb for a full, agonizing minute. He let the humiliation soak completely into the room. He let Caleb drown in his own incompetence. Then, Lincoln calmly reached out and gently pried the pencil from Caleb's trembling, sweaty fingers. That is exactly what I thought, Lincoln whispered with deep disgust. Lincoln turned away from Caleb. He walked around the massive table and stopped right beside my chair. He slid the piece of paper with the pathetic lollipop drawing in front of me. He placed the pencil gently next to my hand. Joshua, Lincoln said. His voice was no longer cold. It was fiercely encouraging. Show him. The pencil felt incredibly warm in my hand. It was a high-quality drafting pencil. The wood was smooth and familiar. I slowly rolled it between my thumb and forefinger. I looked across the table at Caleb. He was exceptionally pale. The arrogant, golden child who had mocked me just 24 hours ago was gone. In his place sat a terrified, hollow shell of a man who had built a massive castle on a foundation of lies and stolen labor. For the first time in my entire life, I did not see the brother I was obligated to protect. I saw my jailer, and his key was finally broken. "Josh," Caleb whispered. His voice cracked in a pathetic whimper. "Please, do not." I looked up at Lincoln. His expression was completely unreadable, but his sharp eyes were infinitely patient. He was waiting for me to make the choice. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs, and I put the graphite to the paper. It was not a conscious, logical decision. It was pure muscle memory. It was 10 years of dark, lonely nights spent hunched over a cheap drafting table, while Caleb slept off hangovers in luxury hotels. It was the crushing anger, the bitter frustration, the years of absolute silence, all flowing out through my arm, through the wood, and into the graphite. I drew the spire connection. I did not just draw the basic shape. I drew the brutal physical forces acting upon it. I used heavy, aggressive dark strokes for the massive compression members. I used light, airy, razor-sharp lines for the tension cables. I rapidly cross-hatched the deep shadows to give it three-dimensional weight. My hand moved with a furious, unstoppable speed. I added complex mathematical notes in the margins using my distinct, blocky architectural handwriting. The exact same handwriting Lincoln had seen on the cocktail napkin. Load transfer via radial truss. Secondary dampening system absolutely required for high-altitude wind shear. The aggressive, rhythmic sound of the pencil scratching fiercely against the heavy paper was the only sound in the massive boardroom. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the undeniable sound of truth tearing through a decade of deception. I worked in a trance for 10 solid minutes. When I was finally finished, I snapped the pencil down onto the marble table. The crack echoed loudly. Lincoln leaned down and picked up the drawing. He studied it intensely. Then, he reached over and flipped open the first of my black sketchbooks. He held my fresh drawing side by side with a page from the book. The match was undeniable. The bold style, the structural confidence, the sheer soul of the lines. "It is identical," Lincoln said quietly. He placed the drawing down carefully. He looked up, and his eyes locked onto Caleb like laser sights. "Get out." Caleb jumped up. His heavy leather chair scraped violently against the floor. "Sir, please, let me explain this. It is a collaboration. I provide the creative direction. Joshua just executes the technical data. He is a technician. He cannot run a firm. He is a high school art teacher." "He is the architect," Lincoln said. His voice turned hard, vibrating with contained fury. "You are a fraud, Caleb. A pathetic, parasitic fraud. You cannot do this to me." Caleb shouted, completely losing his mind. He slammed his fists on the table. "My parents have connections. We have a verbal agreement. The press release is already drafted." "I do not care about your press release," Lincoln said, completely unfazed. He reached over and firmly pressed a button on the sleek intercom console. "Marcus, bring security to the penthouse boardroom. Escort Mr. Caleb Miles out of the building immediately, and permanently ban him from all Ramsey properties." Caleb spun wildly and screamed at me. Spit flew from his lips. "Joshua, say something. Tell him we are partners. Save the family." I looked calmly at my brother. I saw the pure manipulation. I saw the years of emotional theft. My jaw set like stone. "We are not partners, Caleb," I said. My voice was incredibly steady, carrying a weight I did not know I possessed. "I was your ghost, and I am officially done being dead." The heavy double doors swung open. Marcus, the massive head of security, entered the room accompanied by 2 large guards. They did not even touch Caleb. They simply stood uncomfortably close, boxing him in, making him instantly realize that physical resistance was completely futile. Caleb looked at me with pure, unfiltered hatred. The mask was completely gone. "You are dead to us," Caleb spat viciously. "Mom and Dad will never, ever forgive you for this." Caleb turned and stormed out, desperately trying to salvage some tiny shred of dignity. He failed miserably when his expensive leather shoe caught slightly on the carpet, making him stumble clumsily before disappearing into the hallway. The heavy doors clicked shut. Silence returned to the room. Lincoln exhaled slowly and sat down in the chair opposite me. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I knew the exact moment I saw that napkin at the gala," Lincoln admitted softly. "But I needed to see him fail in this room. I needed to see if he possessed even a shred of honor to admit the truth. He did not." "He never has," I said. My hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Here is the situation, Joshua," Lincoln said, getting straight to business. "I have a billion-dollar tower project that absolutely must break ground in 3 months. The lead architect on record was just fired for gross fraud. I need a replacement immediately. I can recommend some excellent corporate firms," I offered automatically, still trapped in my old mindset. "Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. Gensler." Lincoln laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I do not want a faceless firm, Joshua. I want the brilliant mind that designed this atrium. I want you." My heart physically stopped beating for a second. "I am not fully licensed," I stammered. "I have my master's degree, yes, but I never sat for the brutal board exams because, well, Caleb needed my time to do his work. I have a floor full of corporate lawyers who can fast-track the licensing board through emergency provisions." Lincoln waved his hand dismissively. "That is a technicality. I am officially offering you the position of lead architect for the Zenith project. And a principal position at my in-house design studio." This was the dream, the impossible, unreachable dream I had buried 12 years ago. Lincoln continued, sliding a thick blue folder across the marble table toward me. "Furthermore, I am technically buying out Caleb's firm. Or rather, my lawyers are buying the intellectual property, which rightfully belongs to you. The check inside this folder is a non-negotiable signing bonus. It covers the back pay for every single drawing you ever did for that parasite." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The check was printed on heavy blue security paper. I stared at the numbers. It had 6 zeros. $250,000. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why go to all this immense trouble for me?" Lincoln looked out the window at the sprawling city below. 15 years ago, my company was nearly bankrupt. A brilliant young consultant saved my entire operation. She worked tirelessly in the shadows. She let her arrogant male boss take all the credit. I knew, but I did not speak up. I watched her get crushed by the industry. I promised myself if I ever saw that toxic pattern again, I would personally break it. He looked back at me. "Talent is rare, Joshua. Courage is even rarer. Today, you showed me you have both." I touched the crisp paper of the check. Felt incredibly real. "I have one condition," I said. "Name it." "My name goes on the building, carved into the cornerstone." "Done," Lincoln said without hesitation. I folded the check and put it in my pocket. The ghost was finally alive. Leaving the Ramsey Tower with $250,000 in my pocket felt like walking on a different planet. But I knew the storm was far from over. My phone had been aggressively vibrating in my pocket for hours. I had 40 missed calls from my mother, 20 missed calls from my father, and a frantic string of text messages from Caleb that ranged from desperate begging to unhinged, violent threats. "Joshua, answer the phone. You ruined my life. How could you do this to your own family? Dad is having chest pains." I knew I could not hide in my new office forever. I had to face the monster I had finally stopped feeding. At 7 p.m., I hailed a cab. "Highland Park," I told the driver. "The affluent suburbs. My parents' house." The house was a massive, sprawling colonial estate sitting on 2 acres of manicured lawn. It was the house that Caleb's fake success was supposed to pay the massive mortgage on. As the cab pulled into the long driveway, I saw Caleb's Porsche parked violently crooked on the grass. I walked up the stone steps to the heavy oak front door. I did not knock. I used the old brass key I still kept on my ring. The moment I pushed the door open and stepped into the grand foyer, the loud shouting coming from the living room instantly stopped. I walked in. My mother, Martha, was collapsed on the expensive velvet sofa, dramatically clutching a damp handkerchief to her chest. My father, Thomas, was aggressively pacing the Persian rug, a heavy crystal glass of scotch sloshing in his hand. Caleb was sitting on the leather ottoman, his head buried in his hands, looking completely destroyed. They all snapped their heads up to look at me. "You," Dad growled. The pure venom in his voice hit me like a physical punch to the gut. "You have the absolute nerve to walk into this house?" "I grew up here," I said calmly, standing tall in the center of the room. "Not anymore," Caleb screamed. He shot up from the ottoman. His eyes were wild and bloodshot. "You stole my job. You stole my biggest client. You told Lincoln Ramsey I was a fraud." "I told him the truth," I said, my voice dangerously even. "You are a fraud, Caleb. You have not drawn a single floor plan in 10 years. "We had an arrangement," Mom wailed, bursting into fresh, theatrical tears. "We had a family plan, Joshua. You were supposed to support your brother. That is what family does. They support each other." I actually laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "Mom, I did not just support him, carried him. I built his entire fraudulent career on my breaking back. And what did I get in return? I got to be the family joke, the disappointment." "It was a marketing strategy," Dad yelled, slamming his scotch glass down on the mantelpiece so hard it nearly shattered. "We had to deliberately lower the social expectations for you so Caleb looked like a genius by comparison. It is business, Joshua. You are just too stupid to understand the corporate world." "I understand business perfectly fine, Dad," I said, reaching into my jacket pocket. "I just signed a contract worth more money than Caleb has ever actually earned in his entire life. That money legally belongs to the family firm." Caleb stepped aggressively forward, his fists clenched. "That is my project, my intellectual property. My lawyer disagrees," I said. "Since you never formally hired me, never paid me a salary, and never made me sign an NDA, the copyright remains entirely with the original creator." "That is me." Caleb lost his mind. He lunged at me with a clumsy, desperate swing. I saw it coming a mile away. I simply sidestepped. Caleb stumbled violently forward and crashed hard into the glass coffee table, shattering a crystal vase. "Stop it!" Mom screamed, covering her ears. "Stop it right now!" Caleb scrambled up, his face red and bleeding slightly from a scratch. "You think you won? You think Lincoln will keep a loser like you around? You have no presence, Joshua. You will always be a ghost." "Maybe," I said, "but I am a ghost with a very aggressive lawyer. Lincoln is suing you, Caleb, for gross fraud, breach of contract, and embezzlement. He audited the advance payments. Where did the $100,000 for the material research go? Was it Vegas? Or was it to pay the lease on that Porsche outside?" Caleb went sheet white. He looked at Dad. Dad looked away in shame. Suddenly, the front doorbell rang sharply. We all froze in the wreckage of the living room. Who would come over in the middle of a screaming match? Mom wiped her mascara-stained eyes and hurried to the door. A moment later, a voice drifted into the hallway, a voice I had not heard in years. "Hello, Martha. I heard there was a massive crisis. I brought Pinot Noir." It was Aunt Sarah, my mother's older sister, the black sheep of the family who never held her tongue. She marched into the living room wearing a sharp trench coat, carrying a bottle of wine and a thick manila envelope. She surveyed the shattered vase, Caleb's bleeding face, and my calm, defiant stance. "Well," Aunt Sarah said breezily, setting the wine bottle down on a side table, Looks like the chickens have finally come home to roost. Get out, Sarah, Dad snapped, pointing at the door. This is a private family matter. Oh, shut up, Thomas, Sarah fired back instantly. She walked right past him and kissed my cheek. Hello, Joshua. You look 10 pounds lighter. Why are you here, Sarah? Mom demanded, her voice shaking. Because Chloe called me, Sarah said. Caleb's head snapped up. Chloe, your fiancé. Ex-fiancé, I believe, Sarah corrected with a cruel smile. She called me 2 hours ago. She is packing her bags. She wanted me to tell you she left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter. She knows about the embezzlement, Caleb. Caleb let out a pathetic whimper and sank back onto the ottoman. She also wanted me to give Joshua something, Sarah said. She held out the thick manila envelope to me. What is this? I asked, taking it. It is the exact reason I drove 2 hours in the freezing snow, Sarah said, glaring absolute daggers at my parents. Open it, Joshua. I tore the envelope open. Inside were heavily photocopied bank statements from 12 years ago. An illegal document. A last will and testament. My grandfather Josiah's will. I rapidly scanned the legal jargon. My eyes locked onto a specific paragraph. My breath completely caught in my throat. Grandpa left me an inheritance, I whispered, the room spinning slightly. $50,000. Specifically designated to open my own architectural studio. He did, Sarah said loudly, making sure my parents heard every word. He set up a private trust specifically for you, Joshua. He knew Thomas favored Caleb, and he wanted to make sure you had a fair start in life. I looked at the attached bank transfer records. The date was exactly 2 weeks after Grandpa Josiah's funeral. The entire amount, all $50,000, was suddenly transferred out of the trust. Where did it go? I asked, though looking at my parents' terrified faces, I already knew the sickening answer. I flipped to the final page. A massive wire transfer to a local luxury auto dealership. And another transfer to a private university to cover Caleb's failing tuition. My hands started shaking uncontrollably, not from fear, from a rage so deep and primal it terrified me. You stole my inheritance, I said. My voice was a low, dangerous hiss. You legally stole the money my grandfather left for my future, and you used it to buy Caleb a damn Porsche to rush a fraternity. Mom started sobbing hysterically, falling to her knees. We had to, Joshua. Caleb did not get the scholarship. He needed the car to fit in with the wealthy kids. It was a networking investment in his future. We thought you would be fine, Dad yelled desperately, trying to justify the theft. You are so resilient, Joshua. You never asked for anything. Caleb needed the help. It was a family decision to reallocate the college fund. I was eating ramen noodles and living in a rat-infested basement. I roared, finally losing control. I was working 3 terrible jobs while doing Caleb's homework, and you stole my future to buy him a toy. Because you do not matter, Caleb suddenly screamed, jumping up. The room went dead silent. Caleb realized what he had said, but the sheer hatred in him pushed him forward. You do not matter, Josh. You are just the worker bee. I am the star. That money would have been wasted on you buying cheap paints. I built a brand with it. A brand that was just fired, Aunt Sarah said icily. A brand that is about to be indicted for federal fraud. I looked at all of them. My mother weeping on the floor for her ruined golden boy. My father desperately justifying his felony theft. My brother so deeply delusional he actually believed his own lies. I reached into my inner jacket pocket. I pulled out the crisp blue check Lincoln Ramsey had given me. I walked slowly over to the coffee table, carefully avoiding the broken glass. I placed the check face up on the wood. What is that? Dad asked, squinting his eyes at the paper. That, I said, is $250,000. The signing bonus for my new job. Dad's greedy eyes went wide. He instinctively reached his hand out toward the money. I violently slapped his hand away. The crack echoed in the room. Dad yanked his hand back, shocked. "Do not touch it," I warned, picking the check back up and safely folding it away. "I just wanted you to look at it. I wanted you to see exactly what my stolen talent is actually worth. This is what I am worth." I turned my back on them and walked toward the front door. "Joshua, please," Mom wailed from the floor. "He is your brother. We are your family. Do not walk out on us." I stopped with my hand on the heavy brass doorknob. I looked back at them one final time. "I do not have a brother," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I have a parasite, and I just finally took the cure. If any of you ever try to contact me again, my lawyer will officially file criminal charges for the theft of my trust fund. The statute of limitations for fraud by a fiduciary trustee has not run out yet." I opened the door and walked out into the freezing night. The cold air hit my face, and for the first time in 36 years, it felt incredibly clean. I got back into the waiting cab. As we pulled away, I watched the massive, fake colonial house disappear in the rearview mirror. It was just a broken building now, and I knew exactly what to do with broken buildings. You demolish them down to the foundation, and you never look back. The next 6 months of my life were a total blur of concrete, reinforced steel, and aggressive corporate litigation. True to his word, Lincoln Ramsey was not making idle threats in that boardroom. He went after Caleb with the terrifying efficiency of a professional demolition crew. Lincoln's army of forensic accountants tore through Caleb's boutique architectural firm like a hurricane. They found absolutely everything. The fake invoices to phantom suppliers, the lavish personal vacations to Europe expensed as international site visits, and the quiet, desperate payments to my father's business accounts to keep the firm's payroll afloat. It was all violently exposed to the brutal light of day. The Chicago Tribune even ran a massive Sunday feature story titled "The Hollow Skyscraper," how a promising architect built a career on lies. They did not mention my name in the article, which was perfectly fine by me. I was simply referred to as the uncredited, brilliant source material. Caleb's architectural license, which he had originally obtained through a series of shady loopholes and forged apprenticeship hours signed by my father's golfing buddies, was permanently revoked by the state board. He formally filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The bank immediately repossessed the silver Porsche 911 that had been the ultimate symbol of his fake superiority. I did not exactly relish his spectacular fall from grace. Honestly, I did not feel much about him at all anymore. I was simply too busy building my own life. My promotion to chief architect at Ramsey Corporation came with a corner office on the 60th floor and a salary that made my old high school teaching paycheck look like pocket change. But the money was secondary. The real reward was the profound respect. For the very first time in my entire life, I was not sketching desperately in a dark, cramped corner of a cheap apartment. I was standing in a massive studio with floor-to-ceiling windows, surrounded by a dedicated team of junior architects and structural engineers who called me sir, and actually listened to my creative direction. The Zenith project was rising from the dirt, a magnificent skeleton of steel stretching up toward the clouds. I was physically on the construction site every single morning at 6 o'clock. I wore scuffed steel-toed boots, a yellow hard hat, and a heavy canvas jacket. I walked the massive rebar grids with the construction foreman. I personally checked the structural welds. I argued passionately with the lead engineers about the complex wind loads acting on the central glass spire. "The math works perfectly," I told the lead structural engineer one dusty, freezing Tuesday afternoon, pointing at the massive blueprints spread across the hood of a pickup truck. "The radial truss is fully redundant. It will hold the lateral pressure." "It is highly aggressive, Joshua," the engineer replied, shaking his head. "Ramsey Corporation usually plays it much safer on these high-altitude designs." "Lincoln hired me specifically to be bold," I said, tapping the blueprint firmly with my heavy pencil. "Trust the line weight. It will hold." And they did. They trusted me. One crisp Friday afternoon, I was sitting in the temporary heated site trailer, deeply engrossed in reviewing the thermal specifications for the exterior glass panels, when the heavy metal door swung open. I looked up, expecting to see a foreman. Instead, standing in the doorway was Chloe, Caleb's former fiancée. She looked completely different from the glamorous, heavily manicured woman I usually saw at my family's stiff holiday parties. She was wearing a simple wool sweater, faded blue jeans, and almost no makeup. She looked incredibly tired, but there was a new lightness in her eyes, a sense of deep relief. "Hi, Joshua," Chloe said softly, stepping into the trailer and closing the door against the loud noise of the construction site outside. I stood up slowly, putting my pen down. "Chloe, it is good to see you. If you are here about the legal proceedings, my lawyer strongly advised me not to." "I am not here for Caleb," she interrupted quickly, holding up her hand. She stayed near the door, awkwardly clutching her leather purse. I wanted to come see you in person. I wanted to say I am deeply sorry. You do not have anything to apologize for. Chloe, you did not steal my work." "I do need to apologize," she insisted, taking a step closer. Her voice trembled slightly. "I knew Joshua. I did not know the full, terrible extent of it, but I knew Caleb was not actually doing those complex drawings. I lived with him. I saw him totally panic every single time a hard project deadline approached. I saw him furiously calling you at midnight, pacing the living room, screaming at you to fix his mistakes. But I let myself believe his lies because the lifestyle was so comfortable. The expensive dinners were fun. The parties were glamorous. I was shallow, and I chose to look the other way while he used you." I leaned against my drafting table. "What changed your mind?" Chloe took a deep, shuddering breath. "The embezzlement. When I found out he was draining the firm's accounts to pay off massive gambling debts and keeping us afloat with loans from your father. It broke the spell. I realized I was about to marry a complete illusion. I hired a lawyer the next morning and ended the engagement. I packed my bags." She paused, looking directly into my eyes. "And I am the one who sent your portfolio to Lincoln Ramsey." I stared at her, completely stunned. "How did you know to do that?" "I found the hidden box of your old sketchbooks in the back of Caleb's home office closet," Chloe explained. "He was heavily drinking one night, ranting about how he needed to permanently destroy the physical evidence before the Zenith contract was finalized. He actually had a lighter in his hand. I waited until he passed out on the sofa. I took the books. I could not let him burn them, Joshua. They were so incredibly beautiful. I put them in an anonymous package and paid a courier to deliver them directly to Lincoln's private executive assistant a week before the gala." So that was it. The final, hidden piece of the puzzle. Lincoln had known exactly who I was before I ever drew on that cocktail napkin. He was just waiting for the right moment to spring the trap. "Thank you, Chloe," I said sincerely. "You saved my life's work. You saved me." She offered a small, sad smile. She reached into her purse and pulled out a heavy brass key, setting it down on the edge of my drafting table. "This is the key to the downtown luxury condo. It is in Caleb's name, but the bank is officially foreclosing on it next week. I completely moved out yesterday. I wanted you to know that not everyone in that house was entirely blind to your pain. Some of us just chose not to see it for a very long time, and I will regret that cowardice for the rest of my life." "Where is Caleb now?" I asked. I did not want to care, but the habit of a lifetime was hard to break. "Living in your parents' finished basement in Highland Park," Chloe said grimly. "They are all absolutely miserable. Caleb blames your parents for pushing him into a career he hated. Your parents aggressively blame Caleb for ruining their social standing and squandering the college fund. It is a completely toxic, endless loop of resentment. You got out just in time, Joshua." She turned to leave. "Good luck with the tower, Joshua. It is going to be magnificent." I watched her walk out of the trailer and carefully navigate her way across the muddy construction site, dodging a massive cement mixer. I felt a profound sense of closure I did not even know I desperately needed. The ghost of my past was finally, permanently laid to rest. Later that evening, the sun was setting over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in brilliant shades of bruised purple and burning orange. I was packing up my briefcase in my corner office when my desk phone rang. It was Lincoln. Status report on the thermal glass installation, Lincoln barked through the speaker. He was a demanding boss, but he was incredibly fair. We are perfectly on schedule, I replied, checking my master timeline. The first 100 panels go up on Monday morning. Excellent. I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Come down to the private executive garage on parking level B before you head home. I have something to show you. I took the private elevator down to the subterranean garage. The concrete space was pristine, brightly lit by humming fluorescent tubes. Lincoln was standing next to parking slot number 1, holding a sleek black leather key fob. Sitting in the parking space was a vehicle. It was not a flashy, obnoxiously loud sports car. It was not a desperately bright look-at-me toy like Caleb's repossessed Porsche. It was a Rolls-Royce Ghost. It was painted a deep, absorbing midnight black. It was massive, elegant, and possessed an aura of quiet, absolute authority. It was a machine engineered for a person who had already securely arrived at the top of the mountain, not someone who was frantically rushing to prove they belonged there. I took the liberty of ordering a permanent company car for you, Joshua, Lincoln said, tossing the heavy key fob to me. I caught it smoothly. Since you flatly refused to take over the lease on your brother's ridiculous sports car when we acquired the firm. I ran my hand slowly over the freezing cold, perfectly polished hood of the Rolls-Royce. Lincoln, this is entirely too much. I have a perfectly functional Jeep. You are the chief architect of the most important building in this city, Lincoln said firmly, leaving no room for argument. You represent Ramsey Corporation now. You do not drive a 10-year-old Jeep to high-level zoning meetings. Take the car, Joshua. You earned every single piece of it. I opened the heavy, coach-style door and sat in the driver's seat. The interior smelled intensely of rich, handcrafted leather and success. I pressed the ignition button. The massive engine turned over with a sound that was barely a whisper. It was incredibly powerful, yet completely silent. I drove the Rolls-Royce out of the underground garage and merged onto Wacker Drive. The vibrant city lights reflected beautifully across the long black hood. I drove slowly past the exact same bus stop where I had stood shivering in the biting cold just a few months ago, watching my brother speed away in his Porsche. I saw a tired man waiting there now, his shoulders slumped under a heavy coat. I did not feel superior to him. I felt deeply, profoundly grateful for my own escape. I drove toward the lakefront, enjoying the total silence of the cabin. Then, the silence was shattered. My cell phone violently vibrated in the cup holder. I glanced at the screen. It was an unknown, blocked number. I knew exactly who it was. I debated simply ignoring it, letting it ring out into the void. But then I pressed the button on the steering wheel, routing the call through the car's pristine audio system. "Hello," I said calmly. "Joshua." It was my mother, Martha. Her voice was cracked, incredibly weak, and completely stripped of all its usual haughty arrogance. She sounded like a terrified old woman. I kept my eyes on the road. "What do you want, Mom? I told you never to contact me again. We desperately need money, Joshua," she cried. The sound echoed through the quiet cabin of the Rolls-Royce. The corporate lawyers, the legal defense fees for Caleb's fraud trial, they are completely draining our retirement accounts. The bank is actively threatening to take the house in Highland Park. Dad's heart condition is worsening from the stress. Caleb he is in a very dark place. He won't leave the basement. We need your help. Just a loan. Please. We know you got a massive signing bonus. We read about your promotion in the papers. I gripped the leather steering wheel. 12 years ago, this exact tone of voice, this precise emotional manipulation, would have crushed me. It would have forced me to surrender everything I had to save them. But sitting in this car, looking at the city I was helping to build, I felt absolutely nothing. No guilt, no obligation, just a cold, structural clarity. "I invested that money," I said evenly, "into my own future. How can you be so incredibly cruel? She sobbed loudly into the phone. We are your family, Joshua. You are our flesh and blood. You have a moral duty to help your brother. No, I said, my voice hardening into steel. You are the people who deliberately stole my grandfather's inheritance to buy Caleb a luxury car. You are the people who forced me to be a shadow for a decade so you could brag to your friends at the country club. I am not being cruel, Mom. I am simply establishing a boundary. Joshua, please, if you hang up this phone, do not ever bother coming back to this house. That is exactly the plan, I said. I am the structural foundation of my own life now. And you, Mom? You are a catastrophic structural flaw. I am removing you before you bring my building down. I pressed the red button on the steering wheel. The call disconnected, plunging the cabin back into beautiful, peaceful silence. I immediately went into my phone settings and permanently blocked the number. I pulled the Rolls-Royce over to the side of the road near the lakefront. I put the car in park and just sat there in the dark. I waited for the crushing weight of traditional family guilt to arrive. I waited for the heavy anxiety that had ruled my entire existence for 36 years. It never came. Instead, I looked out the window, across the dark water of Lake Michigan, and saw the towering, skeletal steel frame of the Zenith Tower rising aggressively into the night sky in the distance. It was halfway finished. It looked raw, industrial, and exposed to the elements, but it was standing incredibly strong on its own massive foundation. It was easily holding its own immense weight against the freezing wind. And for the first time in my life, so was I. Exactly 1 year later, the grand ribbon-cutting ceremony for the completed Zenith Tower was the undisputed social and corporate event of the season. The crisp autumn air was electric with anticipation. The guest list was practically identical to the crowd at the Gala the year before. I saw the exact same expensive bespoke suits, the same glittering diamond necklaces, and the same practiced, fake corporate smiles. But the fundamental dynamic of the entire room had completely shifted. Caleb was conspicuously absent. According to a brief, gossipy phone call I had with Aunt Sarah a few weeks prior, Caleb was currently working as a low-level sales associate at a used car dealership in rural Wisconsin, struggling to pay off his court-ordered restitution to Ramsey Corporation. My father had suffered a minor stress-induced stroke during Caleb's messy bankruptcy hearings and was currently living in a mid-tier assisted living facility. My mother had been forced to sell the massive Highland Park estate to cover their mounting legal debts. She was now living in a small, cramped condominium in a much less desirable suburb, bitter, isolated, and entirely alone. I did not feel joy at their misery. I simply viewed it as the inevitable collapse of a building constructed on a severely compromised foundation. Actions have consequences. Gravity always wins in the end. I stood confidently on the grand podium next to Theodore Lincoln. The sharp wind whipped aggressively at our silk ties. We were standing 60 stories up, on the spectacular open-air glass observation deck of the Zenith. Directly below us, the magnificent city of Chicago spread out like a glowing, intricate circuit board of light and energy. Ladies and gentlemen, Lincoln's deep voice boomed into the microphone, easily cutting through the howling wind. The massive crowd of journalists, investors, and city officials immediately fell silent. Architecture is not merely about stacking steel and pouring concrete. It is about an unflinching commitment to truth. Lincoln stepped to the edge of the podium, sweeping his hand toward the massive glass structure surrounding us. A building simply cannot lie. If the concrete foundation is weak, the structure falls. If the engineering is flawed, it crumbles. And if the initial design is hollow and soulless, it is quickly forgotten by history. He slowly turned his piercing gaze toward me. He offered a small, genuine smile. For a very long time, the brilliant genius behind this specific design was unfairly hidden in the shadows, stolen by those who lacked the vision to create it themselves. But truth, much like a perfectly engineered skyscraper, has a way of eventually rising to the top. Lincoln gestured warmly toward me. I give you the absolute visionary, the true lead architect of the Zenith Tower, and my most trusted partner, Joshua Miles. The applause that erupted from the crowd was thunderous. It echoed off the surrounding glass facades. It was deafening, validating, and incredibly overwhelming. I stepped up to the microphone. I looked out over the sea of faces. In the very front row, sitting in the VIP section, I saw Aunt Sarah. She was wearing a sharp red blazer and openly wiping a tear from her eye. Sitting right next to her was Elijah, my old friend from the high school history department, cheering louder than anyone else. I had also personally invited my entire former senior art class. They were standing near the back, looking completely awestruck by the sheer scale of the event. "Thank you," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the massive speakers. My hands were perfectly steady. For a very large portion of my adult life, I falsely believed that making myself invisible was the only way to stay safe. I was manipulated into thinking that if I just stayed quietly in the background and carried the heavy burdens of others, I would somehow be protected by them. I was wrong. I reached out and placed my hand flat against the freezing cold, perfectly smooth steel railing of the observation deck. I felt the immense, vibrating power of the building I had brought into existence. I learned the hard way that the shadows are exactly where the rot begins, I continued, looking directly into the flashing cameras. This building we stand on today is completely transparent. The glass hides absolutely nothing. It proudly shows its steel bones and its structural integrity to the entire world. It has nothing to hide. And finally, neither do I. I paused, letting the wind carry my words. To anyone out there watching this today who feels like they are constantly carrying the crushing weight of the world for someone else who refuses to carry their own, put it down. Let them fall if they must. Protect your own foundation. Build your own tower. I grabbed the oversized golden scissors provided by the mayor's office. With one swift, decisive motion, I cut the thick red ceremonial ribbon. The crowd erupted again. Waiters in crisp white uniforms immediately rushed through the throng, popping bottles of expensive champagne. People aggressively surged forward, desperate to shake my hand. Wealthy developers who had completely ignored my existence 12 months ago were suddenly begging for a few minutes of my time to discuss potential future projects. Beautiful women who would never have given a second glance to a tired high school art teacher were smoothly slipping me their embossed business cards. I was polite. I smiled. I shook their hands. But I kept a very distinct, calculated distance. The brutal lessons of my past had served me well. I now knew the massive difference between people who genuinely valued my character and people who simply valued my new, powerful position. Much later that night, after the press had finally gone home and the catering staff was quietly packing up the tables, the massive observation deck was practically empty. I was the last person remaining on the roof. I leaned against the heavy glass barrier, looking out at the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. I heard the quiet scuff of expensive leather shoes on the concrete. Lincoln walked out of the shadows, holding two heavy crystal tumblers filled with amber liquid. "Rare vintage scotch," Lincoln said, handing me one of the glasses. "You did incredibly well today, Joshua. Thank you, Lincoln, for everything." Lincoln leaned heavily against the railing next to me, taking a slow sip of his drink. "So, the Tokyo High Density Project officially breaks ground next month. Are you ready for the long flights?" "I am completely ready," I said, staring into my glass. "But I actually have one major request before we leave." "Another one?" Lincoln chuckled warmly. "You are getting to be a very expensive partner, Joshua. I want to officially establish a foundation," I said, turning to look at him. "The Josiah Miles Scholarship Fund. Named after my grandfather. It will be specifically designed for underprivileged art and architecture students. The kids who possess the raw, undeniable talent, but simply do not have the massive college funds or the powerful family connections to get their foot in the door." I took a sip of the burning scotch. "I want to fully fund the initial endowment using the entire $250,000 bonus you gave me from this project." Lincoln stopped smiling. He looked at me with deep, profound respect. He slowly raised his crystal glass and clinked it firmly against mine. The high, clear sound rang out into the night air. "Done," Lincoln said. "And the Ramsey Corporation will completely match your donation dollar for dollar." We stood there in comfortable silence, looking out at the glittering, endless city we were helping to shape. I reached deep into the inside pocket of my tailored suit jacket. My fingers brushed against a small, hard object. I pulled it out. It was the flimsy, cheap cocktail napkin from the Zenith Gala. I had paid a high-end framer to preserve it perfectly inside a solid, heavy block of clear acrylic. I held the acrylic block up to the glowing city lights. I looked closely at the frantic, aggressive pencil sketch I had drawn that night when I was practically suffocating from the sheer weight of my family's lies. It was just a small, rough sketch, a tiny collection of graphite lines on a disposable napkin. But it was the exact moment I finally made the terrifying decision to stop being a ghost. I lowered the block and looked at my own reflection in the thick, reinforced glass of the tower's perimeter wall. The man looking back at me was not Joshua, the family failure. He was not Joshua, the exhausted, underpaid teacher. And he was certainly no longer Caleb's invisible, discarded brother. The man standing there was Joshua Miles, chief architect, a man whose foundation was finally carved from solid rock. And as I looked out over the sprawling, beautiful city, I realized with absolute certainty that I was just getting started. Here is the truth, my friends. We are often taught from a very young age that family is everything, and that we must sacrifice our own happiness, our own potential, and sometimes even our own sanity to protect them. But loyalty should never be a one-way street paved with your own suffering. If the people who are supposed to love you the most are actively using your talents to build their own comfortable lives while leaving you in the dark, that is not love. That is exploitation. You cannot save a burning building from the inside if the people you are trying to rescue are the ones constantly pouring the gasoline. Sometimes, the most incredibly courageous thing you can ever do is to simply walk out the front door, establish an unbreakable boundary, and let the toxic structure collapse on its own. You have a fundamental right to own your brilliance, to claim your hard work, and to step out of the shadows. Do not let anyone, especially family, convince you that you are meant to be a ghost in your own life. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end of this journey. What is the one lesson from my story that resonates the most with your own life experiences? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments below, or simply drop the word "good," so I know that my long journey to freedom meant something to you today. Your incredible support gives me the strength to keep building.